1967, homosexuality was decriminalised. The Sexual Offences Act legalised homosexual acts in England and Wales, as long as you were over 21, and there was no one else in the building. Basically, people say this is when homosexuality was decriminalised, but it was in a way that still meant queer men could be arrested. Even this would have been preferable for people like Alan Turing, who was convicted in 1952 for gross indecency due to the fact that he had sex with another man. He was ordered to submit to 2 years of estrogen hormone therapy. If we look further back to the Criminal Law Amendment Act in 1885, this made any male homosexual act illegal. Often, as little as a letter expressing affection between two men was all that was needed to bring a prosecution. This became known as the Blackmailer's Charter. Famous writer Oscar Wilde fell victim to it. For those of you wondering, the reason I haven't mentioned queer women is because we were never explicitly targeted by any legislation. Although it was discussed in Parliament in 1921, nothing ever went through due to a fear that it would draw attention and encourage women to explore homosexuality. I've just recited a small part of history about the laws surrounding homosexuality in the UK, and at least a few of you are probably sitting there and thinking, I never knew all that. Which leads me to my question, why isn't this taught in schools? I consider myself very lucky in the fact that I go to a school that is considered to be pretty progressive. But even at a school like mine, there is a huge gap in the curriculum. This was something a small group of students and I brought to the attention of a few staff members early last year. The reason I personally wanted to do this was because I found myself asking, where am I? I didn't feel that I saw myself reflected in what I was being taught. We discussed changes that should be made, which included 3 main areas that should be covered in the PSHE curriculum. Number 1, normalization and understanding. This would include talking about how to be a good ally, as well as talking about different labels, as all that had ever previously been mentioned was lesbian, gay, and bisexual. And coming from the perspective of a queer student, the fact that I didn't fit into one of these 3 boxes presented made me feel like I was less valid. Also talking about the history and reclamation of different words used against the community. For example, the word queer, which in the past has been used in a derogatory way, is now being reclaimed and is used in a handful of different contexts. For example, I'm using it as an umbrella term, as well as a way to label my own sexuality. Number 2, safe sex in a queer relationship. The only types of contraception I can ever recall being mentioned are condoms and the pill. STDs were mentioned, but only in the context of how to prevent them in a cis-het, meaning cisgendered, heterosexual relationship. There should also be a discussion about the fact that virginity is a social construct, meaning it does not exist in objective reality, but as a result of human interaction. Basically, virginity doesn't actually exist. It just exists because we all decided to agree it does. And number 3, coming out. This would include a discussion about how religion, gender identity, and sexuality affect each other, as well as talking about the fact that sexuality is fluid. You don't need to pick a label right away, if at all, and it's okay for your feelings to change. And talking about actually coming out, specifically how to react when someone comes out to you, and how to know if it's safe to come out, and what to do if it isn't. Looking at the general curriculum, mentions of queer people need to be 1,000 times more casual and a lot more regular. 3 PSHE lessons, while vital, do not make the curriculum inclusive. Unfortunately, these changes that we discussed were never implemented. I guess life and coronavirus got in the way. But I'm happy to report that since talking to the school about the topic of this TEDx talk, the issue is beginning to be looked at again. And the reality is, these changes aren't that hard to make. In history, when we learn about World War II and Alan Turing's work towards the Allied victory, we could learn about the fact that he was prosecuted for his sexuality, which eventually led to his death. When we learn about the Tudors, we could learn about the fact that Henry VIII brought in the original laws making gay sex illegal. In English, we could study books with queer characters. We could not only learn about the work of famous queer authors, but their lives as well. Not only this, but the impacts of these changes are so important. A survey by the Gay Lesbian Straight Education Network found that 37.6% of students in schools with LGBT inclusive curriculums reported classmates to be somewhat or very accepting of LGBT people, compared to 26% in schools without. And with the current environment so full of casual homophobia, is this really something we can ignore? There are so many ways in which seeing myself reflected in what I was being taught would have helped me when I was struggling with my own identity. Schools still have a long way to go, but the changes that we can see are encouraging. Despite this, we need to continue to hold schools accountable, something that I hope this talk inspires you to do. I cannot possibly find the words to tell you how much it means to see yourself reflected in what you are being taught. And for the now more than half of young people who identify as not exclusively straight, something that should not only be a hope, but a reality. Thank you.